Yes, it's frustrating how we ended up getting here, but if you had told us going into this series that the Kraken would come out of the first two games in Colorado with a split, I think we would have happily taken that. Plus, for what it's worth, the Kraken did outscore the Avalanche 5-4 in those two games. What's cracking, everybody, and welcome back to Kraken R&R, where the Seattle Kraken do fall to the Colorado Avalanche 3-2 in Colorado to tie the series at 1. And it is for the Kraken a game that they kind of did let slip through their fingers, and hopefully that doesn't come back to bite them as this series goes on. The good news, at least on that front, is that with the Kraken having won game 1, even though they lose this one, this is still now effectively a 5-game series where they have home ice advantage, with the next 2 at home, and then every other between Colorado and Seattle in games 5, 6, and 7, 6 and 7 if necessary. Though, of course, home ice advantage might not be the most comforting thing for the Kraken, who did lose 21 of their 41 home games over the course of the season, 4 of those in overtime or shootout, so technically they're above NHL 500 still at home, but they did play better on the road, and actually the same is true of the Avalanche, who now come into Seattle on the road. Plus, even outside of how the Kraken fared at home, when it comes to these playoffs, well, it's completely even right down the middle across the entire playoffs, with so far 2 games in each series, home teams having won 8 of the 16 games, and away teams having won the other 8. Now, when it comes to Game 2, if we're being honest, I think with the Kraken having won Game 1 somewhat convincingly, we were all kind of expecting that the Avalanche were going to come out with something to prove in Game 2, and more than likely we would end up with this final result of the series being tied coming back to Seattle. Really, the biggest hope I had as a minimum for this game is that the Kraken at least keep it close, which they did, but how we get there is kind of the issue. Not a big issue. Again, the Kraken will be able to move on, and if anything, they'll use what happened in periods 2 and 3 in this game to maybe come back with some purpose in Game 3. But although we expected Colorado to maybe come out of the gates hot, looking to prove something in the first period after what happened to them in Game 1 on home ice, well, that didn't really end up happening, as honestly, the first period of this game, and especially the first few minutes of it, may as well have been copy-pasted from Game 1 right into Game 2. As once again, right from puck drop, it's all Kraken early on, eventually getting the first 5 shots on goal of this game, and really it was more like the first 8, as the only shot for the Avalanche that breaks that up is one that just kind of goes off an Avalanche stick and trickles up to the net. Grubauer just shoves it aside, so it's really not even a shot on goal. Either way, they count it as one technically. Still, the Kraken dominating the offensive end of the ice throughout the first half of this first period, and getting some dangerous looks even early on. In fact, it's hardly even a minute into the game when Morgan Geekie gets a shot from that faceoff circle on the glove side of Georgiev that gave him problems in Game 1. And Geekie does beat Georgiev, but does not beat the post on the near side, as it goes off the inside of that post and bounces out the other way. But something like a minute and 30 seconds later, after the puck takes a quick detour through the Kraken end, doesn't spend much time there, Gord gets it out past the Avalanche defense, and just like that, the Kraken are rushing down the ice with it. Tolvanen has it, and it's an odd man chance with Tolvanen and, of all people, Justin Schultz on the far side. Between them is Cale Makar, and I gotta be honest, I don't really know what Makar's doing here. He kind of drifts towards Tolvanen as Tolvanen's coming down the boards, which is already not ideal from a defensive perspective, because now if a pass gets through from Tolvanen to Schultz, Schultz is wide open one-on-one with Georgiev. But at least if Makar can get up close and disrupt that pass from Tolvanen, then that prevents it from getting to Schultz and anything dangerous from happening in the first place. But just as Makar closes in on Tolvanen next to the boards, he kind of pulls up and gives Tolvanen the space to fire off this pass up to the slot. And sure enough, Tolvanen puts that pass right through Makar into the slot, where a wide open Justin Schultz taps it through the 5-hole and into the back of the net to give the Kraken the early 1-0 lead, with the Kraken now scoring in all 4 of the 4 periods in this playoffs within the first 5 minutes. And after having surprised most people by winning Game 1, now to have this early pressure once again, and now once again an early 1-0 lead in Game 2, really drove home the point that that Game 1 win wasn't just a fluke, and the Kraken really do belong in this series and are going to make it hard for the Avalanche to win it if they even can. A point that even gets further driven home as the Kraken continue to get pressure with this early lead and nearly stretch it to 2-0 just a couple minutes later on a rush by Beniers, as well as McCann and even Eberle, I think, following up as that first line starts to get the offensive pressure that they had throughout points in this game. although they don't end up getting on the scoreboard for a second game in a row. And eventually, with all this momentum going Seattle's way, they end up with a power play here as we near the midpoint of the first period. But it turns out to be a power play that the Kraken, although they get set up a couple of times, really can't seem to get anything to the inside or any real dangerous opportunities. In fact, I'm not sure if they got a shot on goal. If so, maybe just one on this power play. Eventually, the Avalanche do end up getting an actual real shot on goal between this Kraken power play, which they don't score on, and not long after, Colorado's first power play of the game. An Avalanche power play that, unlike the Kraken one before it, is able to get set up right away and start getting those shots off on goal. Now, Grubauer is able to make the saves, but the Kraken are having a hard time getting out of their end of the ice, with that first unit of the Avalanche just hemming them into that end, and it seems like it's inevitable that this game is going to end up tied, with really the only reprieve that the Kraken get through the first half of this Avalanche power play being a kind of half clear that they end up getting. They do get it out of their end of the ice, but only far enough that they can get the two forwards off for the change before the Avalanche are right back in with that first unit staying out. However, not long after, it is that change of the forwards now getting Gord and McCann that creates the magic here, as McCann is the one that kind of starts it by muddying things up along the boards up in the corner, and then Gord is the one that makes the magic really happen as he gets to the puck before Makar can and dumps it out to the far end. And then not only that, but manages to beat Makar to this puck, which I think is probably a combination of Makar having been out there now for this entire power play, so definitely on a long shift. But again, especially after what happened with the first goal the Kraken scored, and now Gord straight up beating Makar down there after starting farther back than him, really demonstrating that Makar is definitely not 100%. Either way, Makar just coasts through his end. Gord's able to beat him to the puck in the corner. Eventually, Comfer gets there and helps Makar win that battle, but it just kind of squirts out, and then McKinnon actually kind of lazily goes up to scoop the puck up and start the rush back the other way. But just as he loops in and gets the puck on his stick to start the rush back the other way, Gord reaches out and pokes it off the end of McKinnon's stick and right out into the high slot, where coming into the offensive end off of a change is Brandon Tanev. He gets the puck, skates it in, fires off the shot, and buries it for the shorthanded goal to give the Kraken the 2-0 lead. And just like that, not only do the Kraken have their first shorthanded goal in the playoffs in franchise history, they have their first special teams goal in the playoffs in franchise history, and the first special teams goal of either side in this series. So thanks to the somewhat lazy back check of Makar, whether that was due to injury or a long shift, whatever it was, allowing Gord to get to that puck first, and then lackadaisical start to the breakout and approach of the puck by McKinnon, allowing Gord to get that poke of the puck to get it off his stick. Tanev comes in and capitalizes on what honestly is still probably a shot that Georgiev should have been able to save. Either way, it goes over his glove hand shoulder, the same one the Kraken put two of their goals in off of in the last game. The Kraken now are very much in the driver's seat in game 2, already with the 1-0 series lead. And of course, in classic fashion with this Kraken team, all 5 of their playoff goals now coming from 5 different players, and with Tanev notoriously the best with celebrations, he goes right up to the boards and blows a kiss to an Avalanche fan on the other side of the glass, which I'm sure will end up on some highlight reel somewhere. The Kraken then do finish off that kill, and then almost immediately afterwards, I suppose because they figure if they can't score on the power play and can score on the penalty kill, they might as well go to the penalty kill again. They send the Avalanche to a second power play almost immediately. Seems like a bit of a questionable strategy, and they don't end up getting another shorthanded goal. They don't allow the Avalanche to get a power play goal either, which I suppose is a good thing. So we go to the end of 1 with the Kraken maintaining that 2-0 lead. And if they can close this game out, with a very good chance of coming home in the driver's seat, a 2-0 lead also in the series. And honestly, as we enter the second period, it almost seems like it's make or break time for the Avs. Not because a 2-goal deficit with 40 minutes left is an insurmountable thing for them to come back from, though if it wasn't for a Georgiev save in the final minute of the first period on a Yanni Gord breakaway, or the puck rebounding off of him going past Bjorkstrand who was following it up, this would have been 3-0, and also not because even if the Kraken were to win this game, the Avalanche couldn't come back from a 2-0 series deficit to end up winning the series, but because after a pretty lackluster game 1 where they just didn't look like themselves and the Kraken took advantage of it, they responded to that by coming out with more of the same in the first period of game 2. So if they just continue that and just never seem to get that energy back that not only won them the Stanley Cup last season, but got them through all of their injury issues this season to a Central Division title, then if it's not going to show up after what happened in Game 1 or after what happened in first period of Game 2, when is it going to show up? Well, unfortunately for the Kraken, it does end up showing up here in the second period, and although it takes the Avalanche a couple of minutes to really start to build momentum, the Kraken just kind of keep themselves stuck in their end of the ice with multiple icings, and then a couple of shots on goal that Grubauer freezes, but that just leads to more defensive zone faceoffs. And although the first period featured actually a lot of faceoff wins for the Kraken, no matter where it was, the second period was just constant Avalanche winning faceoffs. And although the Kraken are able to survive a number of lost faceoffs in their defensive end through the first 5 or 6 minutes of the second period, eventually it's one too many. And it's another lost faceoff in that defensive end that ends up right out to Cale Makar at the point. He fires off the shot, which Grubauer sees coming all the way and is set up to save. But Lehkonen is able to get a stick on it to deflect it just a few feet out in front of Grubauer. And it goes between his glove, over the pad, and into the net to bring the Avs to within 1. Okay, so that's certainly not ideal, but the Kraken still have a lead, even though they weren't able to score in the first 5 minutes of a postseason period for the first time in franchise history here in the second. But they still have a 2-1 lead, and as long as they can get a quick response, or at least prevent the Avalanche from getting momentum, they should be perfectly... You've got to be freaking kidding me. 48 seconds. 48 seconds later, the Avalanche, after having the Kraken clear the puck one more time, rush right back down the ice. Nichushkin gets through the entire Kraken defense around Alexiak, who honestly had been having a fantastic end of the season and was great in Game 1. But Nichushkin gets around him, the pass gets up to Nichushkin from Rodriguez, and Nichushkin just makes a beautiful move on Grubauer to go forehand to backhand and put it right past the toe and in, just right in a little window between Grubauer's toe and the post to tie the game at 2. And the Kraken lead evaporates just like that. Just like that. And to make matters worse, not only have the Kraken let the Avalanche right back into this game, where just moments earlier they had a 2-0 lead, also bringing the crowd right back into the game, where at the end of the first period, and honestly right up until the first Avalanche goal, you could have heard a child sneeze from the last row of the upper deck all the way down at ice level. The Kraken can't even manage to stem the tide whatsoever. In fact, the best scoring chance the Avalanche probably get in this entire game comes a couple minutes later as Grubauer continues to get lit up by shot after shot. Fortunately, he's able to make save after save the rest of the way through the second period, coming up with a series, or I guess 2 fantastic saves, one on a wide open shot from the slot off McKinnon on the rush, and then is able to go full splits to keep the rebound chance out. Mercifully for Grubauer, eventually the Avalanche kind of end up killing off this momentum they have going themselves by sending the Kraken to a power play late here in the second. A power play for the Kraken that really doesn't ever go much of anywhere. At least they killed off the Avalanche momentum, so they've got that going for them. Until the final couple of seconds of it, and actually this bleeds over as that 5th guy is coming back out on the ice for the Avalanche. McCann fires off a shot from well out, like above his normal shooting area. Still, it's a McCann shot on the power play, so it's relatively dangerous. Georgiev, though, is able to make the save, but not control the rebound, as that goes right out to the other side to Tolvanen, who fires off a shot, but puts it off a defender's back out in front of him. Comes right back to Tolvanen. From a knee, he fires off another shot, which Georgiev is able to make a save on there. Wenberg out in front, though, is able to shovel the next rebound back out to Bjorkstrand, who has Georgiev pretty much dead to rights, fires off a shot from the slot, and Georgiev somehow comes up with a 3rd consecutive save to keep this puck out of the net and maintain that tie game. At least on the bright side for the Kraken, they are able to leverage this flurry of chances at the end of the power play into momentum throughout the rest of the last couple of minutes of this second period, which in the final minute, once again, nearly leads to a late goal on a 3-on-1 chance, and probably the best scoring opportunity the Kraken had in this game outside of the Schultz one early on that ended up scoring, and maybe the Yanni Gourde breakaway. But it's a 3-on-1 chance with Beniers starting with the puck. He gets it up to Alexiak, who's coming in late. Alexiak back down to Beniers, and then Beniers gets a beautiful crossing pass to Eberle, who, if Eberle is able to get a one-time shot off with this pass from Beniers, it is in the back of the net without question. Unfortunately, it ends up being kind of a double tap from Eberle as he isn't able to handle it cleanly, and by the time he does get the shot off on the second touch of the puck, Georgiev is just barely able to get his toe back to make the save on Eberle's shot. And we do go to this second intermission with the game tied at 2. So then as we go into the third period, you can kind of look at it from a couple of different angles. Either the optimistic one for the Kraken, where they did finish that second period very strong with a couple of grade A, even A+ scoring opportunities that very well should have had this game with a Kraken lead 3-2 coming into this third period, especially after what was otherwise a disastrous second, so a good recovery. On the other hand, you can look at it as the Avalanche finally seemed to have their mojo going with that second period having gone the way it did for most of it, not to mention the fact that they were able to tie the game after the early Kraken 2-0 lead, and now Georgiev really seems locked into this game. And that's kind of more, typically I like to be optimistic about the Kraken and just my sports teams I cheer for in general. The Mariners made that hard really until last year, but that's a different issue. But honestly, even with that, as we came into this third period, I was leaning a little bit more on the pessimistic side of things as far as where it felt like this game was headed. Because even though the Kraken did have that fantastic press late in the second, which if they had scored on it and came into this third with a lead, I would be all in on the Kraken once again able to close out a game in the third and come home with the 2-0 series lead. Because they weren't, it still felt like the Avalanche had everything going for them throughout that period. They had everything going offensively in those 2 quick goals to not only tie the game, but get the crowd back in it. And then even with that late Kraken press, it really felt like that just served the Avalanche again, with Georgiev really locked into the game at this point, and the crowd even more in it than ever with those series of saves that Georgiev had made. And sure enough, although the Kraken do put up a pretty good fight here in the third, it was one that as it went on, it was very clear that whoever scored the third goal was going to be the team that won. And while the Kraken were getting their chances, Beniers ended up actually getting a breakaway, which he nearly scored on. Most of those chances were on the rush, and Georgiev again was locked into this game and making every save. Meanwhile, the Avalanche were spending the vast majority of the time in the offensive end for them, the Kraken end of the ice, which for what it's worth, and I do think it's a good sign going into the rest of the series, defensively, even though they were locked into their end of the ice for a large portion of this third period, the Kraken were doing a very good job of keeping the Avalanche to the outside, even with that first line spending a lot of time on the ice in this third as well. However, even with those shots coming from the outside, and Grubauer really throughout this game and throughout the series so far doing a good job of limiting and controlling any rebounds, part of limiting rebounds means that you get more face-offs in your end of the ice, and once again, that's what comes back to bite the Kraken, as it's another face-off they lose in the defensive end, late here in the third period with about 7 minutes left. Actually, technically, I think this was scored as Beniers winning this face-off, but honestly, I don't know how they ended up with that conclusion, as the Avalanche are clearly the team that end up with possession off of this face-off. Eventually, that leads to a shot, and Grubauer does make the save, but it rebounds out to the other side, right to Devon Taves, who skates in, fires off the shot, and beats Grubauer far side to give the Avalanche the 3-2 lead. It's really the first bad rebound that Grubauer had given up this entire series so far, and even at that, he had been fantastic again throughout this game and had a couple more saves in him throughout the rest of the way. So it's hard really to put it on him. Ultimately, this just comes down to the Kraken inability to win faceoffs with any kind of consistency whatsoever, especially where they matter most in their end of the ice. Eventually, a few minutes later, with nothing else really having happened either way, the Kraken do end up going empty net, which actually starts in a 4-on-4 period, so it's kind of a pseudo power play for the Kraken, just without a goaltender in their net. Still, they aren't really able to generate much as far as dangerous chances out of that, and the Avalanche do ice this one away, not with an empty netter, but they end up winning 3-2. So when it comes to takeaways from this game, the big one is obvious. Face-offs in the defensive end for the Kraken. I'd say they have to find some way to win more of them, but it's been a problem all season long, and even against another team that hasn't been good in the face-off circle during the course of the season, it's continued to be a problem for the Kraken. They do only get beat out 32-26 in face-offs in this game, but it felt like half of those 32 that the Avalanche win were in the Kraken end of the ice. So I don't think it's really something we can expect to get better for the Kraken. What can get better is having a plan for what the Kraken do when they lose those faceoffs in that end of the ice and preventing any chances from getting too dangerous. Whatever the answer though, the Kraken just need to come up with something here, because it's now 3 of the 4 Avalanche goals in this series that have come almost directly off of lost faceoffs in the Kraken end of the ice. If they can't get that cleared up, then this is going to be a very difficult series, because the Avalanche really haven't even scored other than that one time in this game on the rush for Nichushkin, just with normal offense and rush chances, or power play for that matter, where the Kraken once again held the Avalanche 0-2 in this game. And with the talent the Avalanche have, they are eventually going to start getting those normal 5-on-5 goals, and they're going to get a couple power play goals at some point, you'd have to think. So if the Kraken can't clean up these issues off of faceoffs, it's going to be a long road the rest of the way. The other takeaway, also more on the negative end of things, is the shots on goal, where, I mean, as far as positive takeaway, Grubauer once again was pretty fantastic in this game. Not maybe quite as good as game 1, but he was still pretty good throughout this one. I mean, a .927 save percentage, saving 38 of 41 shots. So as far as Kraken players go, he's certainly one of the best for the Kraken in this game. But the volume of shots, I mean, 41 in this game after 30 plus, I think, in the previous one, for a team that was allowing the second fewest shots on goal per game coming into this series. The Kraken have to find some way to start limiting those shots on goal once again. Like I said, most of those shots were coming from the outside, but if you allow a team to get 30, 40 shots, it doesn't matter if they're from the outside, eventually they're going to find a couple of tips or rebound off of some of those shots, like what happened in this game, and find the net off of it. And finally, before we get to the Kraken 3 stars anyway, once again, for people that are new to playoff hockey, a very clear step up in the physical aspect of this game and just playoff hockey in general, as we saw 2 teams who, again, were in the bottom third in the NHL in hits per game over the course of the regular season, combined for nearly 70 hits in game 1, the Kraken having 40, the Avalanche 39. The Kraken responded with another 40 in this game, and the Avalanche up to 50. So yeah, things are definitely ramping up in that category, and it'll be interesting to see how the Kraken can hold their own in that aspect going forward. Again, though, it's certainly not all negative for the Kraken, even if it is frustrating that they blew the 2-0 lead so that they don't come home with the 2-0 series lead. They still do come home with that series split and home ice advantage the rest of the way, which is certainly a plus, even if we have all those issues with how the Kraken played regular season at home. It'll be fun to see the Kraken in the playoffs at home at the very least, and we can end this on a positive note with the Kraken 3 stars, where my first one is going to be Yanni Gourde, 2 assists in this game. He was the one that started that breakout for Tolvanen and Schultz on the first goal, and then was pretty much the guy that created everything on that shorthanded goal from one end of the ice to the other, that Tanev ends up finishing with that shot over Georgiev's shoulder. Was it the best night on the back check for Gourde and that line in particular? By their standards, certainly not, but not necessarily terrible either. Some of the stats might point that way. I didn't really see them as having a terrible night on the back check or in the defensive end. Either way, certainly did enough on the forecheck and on the penalty kill to make up for it. So Gourde, first star. Second star, once again, I'm going with Grubauer. If it isn't for the absolute volume of shots that the Kraken let up and losing all of those defensive zone faceoffs, which immediately put a goaltender on their heels, Grubauer would have had another win here for the Kraken. And then third star, there's a couple of guys I could go with here. Certainly Beniers comes to mind. Schwartz had another pretty good game. And I really want to give it to Will Borgen, who I thought had a fantastic game in the defensive end, on a number of occasions, actually stealing the puck from McKinnon along the boards, and I think took it from Makar at one point, stole it from Rantanen. Just a great game from Borgen, especially as a third pairing defenseman, to be able to go right up against the top unit of the opposing team and more than not come away with the puck from them. In the end, though, I am going to give it to Schultz. Also had a fantastic game defensively, and obviously puts the Kraken on the board with that early goal, jumping up into the play on that rush with Tolvanen. As always, though, if you disagree, there's someone else you'd like to give the third star to, or maybe even one of the other 2 stars. Let me know about that down in the comment section. How we're feeling about, even with a frustrating last couple of periods of the game, the Kraken coming back home still with a series split in the 2 road games, and just in general, the first ever franchise home playoff game coming up on Saturday. with hopefully good vibes going into that one, even if the Avalanche won this game. Until then, stay safe out there, be good to each other, God bless, and go Kraken.